There are some core components that can make a standard horror movie an instant classic. Great characters, gruesome kills, a creepy antagonist, and some awesome special effects. But one of the worst things that can befall a genre classic is for it to be given a terrible remake. Some remakes will of course go on to become bad movie fodder to be laughed at and mocked over a giant bowl of popcorn. But what about the remakes that the world forgot? Well, that's a good question. I'm Ellie with What Culture, here with 10 horror movie remakes that were instantly forgotten. Number 10. Black Christmas 2019. There are two possible films that might come to mind when you hear Black Christmas. Firstly, the 1974 festive slasher starring Olivia Hussey, or secondly, the middling 2006 Canadian remake starring Katie Cassidy, which followed the same sorority central plot. Both films are unanimously recognised and remembered, the former a definitive and formative entry in the slasher subgenre, and the latter something of a cult fave in horror circles. However, in 2019, another Black Christmas remake was released, and to very little acclaim. Starring Imogen Poots as Riley, this interpretation focuses heavily on rape culture and feminist issues, but strays fairly far away from the original source material in its approach. Without the monstrous Billy, who featured in both the Bob Clark original and Glenn Morgan's gnarly 2006 remake, it feels like an entirely new concept with a stolen name. Even citing black magic as the cause of the murderous fraternity antics, changing the dynamic of the franchise entirely. With poor reviews and forgettable box office ratings, 2019's Black Christmas won't be making its way onto Santa's nice list anytime soon. Number 9. Firestarter 2022. Based on the Stephen King novel of the same name, Firestarter was originally released to audiences in 1984 and starred a young Drew Barrymore at the height of her E.T. fame. While it never quite reached the cinematic heights of other popular King adaptations such as It or Carrie, it was still recognised as a solid movie of its time. In 2022, Blumhouse Productions opted to remake the classic with director Keith Thomas at the helm, choosing notable acting icons such as Zac Efron to attract a younger crowd. Despite keeping many of the core plot points the same as the original, the Blumhouse team chose to reimagine several key choices from the ending of Firestarter, a move that proved to be very unpopular with critics. Number 8. I Spit on Your Grave 2010. Remaking a cult film is always going to be a controversial choice, and choosing to remake a film as morally questionable as I Spit on Your Grave is certainly a brave one. With the contentious rape revenge horror having originally released in 1978 to less than favourable reviews, this violent and gory film made waves in the genre with its approach to sexual assault, murder, religion, and feminist issues. So when Cinetel Productions opted to release their own adaptation in 2010, the reception was predictably poor. Following the same story as the original, with a young woman being violently assaulted and seeking murderous revenge on her attackers, the 2010 remake was seen as purposeless and equally as bad, if less memorable, than the original. Number 7. Martyrs 2015. When the original Martyrs was released in 2008, it was hailed for pushing the boundaries of on-screen international horror and violence to a whole new level. When the Martyrs remake was released only 7 years later in 2015, it was only really watched by people who liked Spencer from Pretty Little Liars. With a refreshing female-led cast, a Catholicism-inspired antagonist, and an almost nihilistic feel, the original caused outrage and chaos in the film industry at the time, and would go on to assemble a wide range of fans from around the world. Therefore, when the remake was aired, its loose retelling of such a sharp and clever plot felt lacking in substance, lacking in energy, and was harshly condemned by the original director as a poor imitation. While the original flick is definitely worth a watch, the remake is totally forgettable and not worth watching. Number 6. My Bloody Valentine 3D 2009. Supernatural fans, you might want to cover your ears for this one. This 3D remake of the original My Bloody Valentine in 2009 was undeniably a mess in high def. With the Canadian original being released in 1981 to avid cult success, the simple story of a mining town serial killer murdering young people on Valentine's Day had a watchable plot and all the makings of a staple 80s horror flick. High on gore, low on fancy effects, and possessing some great skills to shock the audiences. The remake, however, however, which starred Jensen Ackles as the infamous murderous miner, really failed to make a positive impact. Without the goofy acting and grainy style of the original, this modern remake fell flat, with awkward 3D effects making up most of the movie. Although the remake spins the original villain arc on its head, every other element of the film suffers by comparison, from the increased amount of gratuitous nudity to the confusing motives of the characters. Sorry Dean, but this one just won't be going in the archives. Number 5. Pet Sematary 2019. The second Stephen King adaptation on this list, Pet Sematary, is a classic 80s horror flick and is widely recognised as one of his most popular stories. The 1983 original was directed by Mary Lambert and is largely remembered as a solid film with some great scares and iconic lines. With the bar set so high by the original film, the 2019 remake had a lot to live up to and sadly didn't quite make it off the ground. The plot largely remained the same despite a simple gender swap of young Gabe, with that role now going to sister Ellie. Although this remake wasn't terrible, it didn't make much of an impression when compared to the original, with nothing particularly good or particularly bad to help it stand out. It's not unlikable, but it's simply unmemorable. Number 4. The Wolfman 2010. It's always going to be difficult remaking a classic from Hollywood's golden age, with such a huge disparity in casting, audience expectations, cinematic style, and cultural progression. The original The Wolfman from 1941 captured audiences through its modern approach to horror transformations, cult legends, and pre-war anxieties. Layered with meaning, metaphor, and symbolism, the elegantly told story used clever special effects, high-quality prosthetics, and ingenious set designs to create a forward-thinking film in a time of limited resources, something a remake would struggle to live up to. The 2010 remake, starring Anthony Hopkins and Emily Blunt, attempts to expand the storytelling universe but fails to create any genuine thrills or chills for the viewers. Relying heavily on uneven CGI performances over practical effects, the transformation scenes feel clunky and cheap and lacking in suspense. Despite such a stellar cast, even the performances felt bland, with long lingering scenes that lacked energy or excitement. Number 3. The Grudge 2020. This iconic franchise was a staple of 2000 horror. A marker of the thirst for paranormal horror of the time, these films followed the story of young women who stumble upon demonic supernatural forces through cursed objects or experiences. Creepy, horrifying, and the perfect foundation for sleepover scares, the premise was perfect and became a must-see film for the discerning early aughts horror fan. As many fans missed, however, a remake was released in 2020 and no one really seemed to notice. Despite being produced by legendary director Sam Raimi, this non-linear film took 9 years to make and was released just before the outbreak of COVID-19. With a confused narrative, watered-down scares, and a formulaic plot, critics gave it predominantly negative reviews, and its slow burn approach to horror left many reviews feeling sleepy. Number 2. The Fog 2005. It was always going to be tough trying to remake a John Carpenter movie, but 2005 remake of The Fog really failed to get off the ground. Despite the fact that the 1980 version initially suffered widespread negative reviews, over the years, it went on to amass a dedicated cult following who fell in love with the film's elegant and chilling approach to small-town horror. The remake, on the other hand, received one of the lowest ever Rotten Tomato scores of 4% and would win 2 standout awards for being an absolutely terrible horror movie. Retelling the original narrative of a ghostly gang of undead shipmates seeking to kill the living residents of a small town through a mysterious fog, the two films are relatively similar in plot, but vastly different in quality. While the original had genuine scares and that magical Carpenter approach to horror storytelling, the remake had lackluster characters, overstuffed plotlines, and a lack of genuine scares. It sadly falls into the category of a boring horror movie, and considering the scale and potential of its source material, it's a forgettable and disappointing film all round. Number 1. When a Stranger Calls 2006. If you've ever wondered where the phrase "the call is coming from inside the house" came from, it definitely wasn't this 2006 remake. With the original 1979 Fred Walton picture having some of the most iconic lines, scares, and thrills in horror history, its premise became legendary, inspiring further freaky phone call scenes from films like Scream. Set around a babysitter who receives increasingly ominous phone calls whilst caring for 2 small children, the original movie is well paced with real fear and tension at the heart of the action. The remake remake, however, only really takes inspiration from the first 20 minutes of When a Stranger Calls, making up an entirely new plot as the film goes on. Not only is the remake a morally softer story than the original, but it also introduces new characters that don't really add anything new to the story. With only a 9% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, this film bombed at the box office and failed to impress fans, despite a few fun and familiar faces popping up as secondary characters, from Glee's Diana Agron to Marvel's Clark Gregg. And that concludes our list. Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below, and while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe and tap that notification bell. Also head over to Twitter and follow us there, and I can be found across various social medias just by searching Ellie Littlechild. I've been Ellie with What Culture. I hope you have a magical day, and I'll see you real soon.